Did you decide to suddenly go off and explore what is one of the most troubled parts of the world?
This is true. Well, really, it first came about that I lived in the summers actually in a meditation centre in France, and during this time, I made friends with a secular Israeli who was the gardener for the centre, and just through this engagement, I actually started to ask him questions about the Holy Land, and really, up until this time, I knew very little about it. And so he sat with me and he took me back into about 150 years of history, in full of the Ottoman Empire, into the early 20th century when there was a mandate held over the state of Palestine by the British, and it was just really a whirlwind of a history lesson. And then I started to learn about the struggle and the strife and today's situation, and really in that I was like, wow, I have to go to this place and kind of see it for myself.
But it's one thing to be stirred by meeting somebody like that, and also by perhaps some of the horrific images we see on television. But then the whole process of getting there, how did that come about?
Well, really, it's to travel to Israel, it's fairly easy in a sense. We can fly there, no problem at all. Going into the West Bank, obviously, I didn't go to Gaza. The Gaza is even more of a challenge to gain access to. But even to go into the West Bank, it depends on the time and the situation. When I was there, it was quite calm, and so actually you can just get onto a bus in East Jerusalem, and that bus will take you into the West Bank. So I first went to Bethlehem, and actually I was joined throughout the book. You'll see I joined an organisation that is just basically it's working to form in solidarity between not just the international community, but there's Israelis partake on this as well, and it really gives that space and that opportunity for Israelis and Palestinians to meet each other. Now, and during this, they can form bridges.
You've used the word Israeli and you've used the word Palestinian. Those are the nation words, but we also have to use the words Jewish and Arab, which reduces it to a completely different level in many senses. What sense, when you were in Israel, did you get from that? Because you talked about the person who was who was a secular Israeli rather than someone who was Jewish. Did you get to meet the Jewish people who were there and to sense the passion with which they viewed the situation as against just an ordinary rank and file Israeli?
Yeah, within that, that's one of the challenges of this situation, is that within Israel it's a completely fragmented society itself. So not only do you have the ultra-Orthodox Jews, you have Orthodox Jews, you have secular Jews, and within these there's actually very little dialogue between these separate groups. So then when you try to form an idea of how we can unify Israel and Palestine, not unify, but to kind of bring these two separate people together, when there's actually a disparity of the communities within it, all want their own, all have their own expectation of what the state of Israel should mean. It's very, very challenging, and actually this is one part of the difficult of why peace is very hard to find, because there's a little unified voice within Israel for peace.
Now, one of the things I was impressed with is that you just didn't go out there as a tourist viewing it from the sort of an outsider's perspective. You got your hands dirty. You went to work in one of the olive groves. Is that right? On olive?
Well, actually, it was quite a number of different olive groves around about. So actually, the work, it's called Being Peace, and as you rightly said in the book, it was called a meditation retreat. And actually, that word retreat is it's kind of a little bit misleading, because it kind of gives the idea of stepping back, when really what we're doing there is we're going towards something, and we're using that thing that you harness in meditation, peace, love, compassion, and you take it to a place that's quite experiencing struggles, and you try and listen, and you try and look for ways into the situation that aren't actually are not there in the mainstream, and actually there's been this, as I write, the wall, but there's the mental wall as well, which is probably harder to break down than the physical barrier itself. Is actually this handing down of 60 years of what occupation, 60 years of difficulties between these two people, and then therefore it now takes a kind of a different approach, and that's a large part of we were there, was just basically to listen, to work in solidarity, to try not to form too much judgment, although as I come in the book, the judgment will always be a part of it, as you can only go somewhere and see something and reflect really what you see and what that means to you, and which is what I try to do in the book.
What's your own faith background?
My faith background? My faith background, actually, I would call myself probably non-religious in a sense. I do live in a meditation centre throughout the summer, in which I do practice meditation on a daily basis.
So when you went there, did they say, "Oh, you must be a Christian because you come from a Christian-sounding background," or were they prepared to accept you as just being somebody who wanted to come and explore the country and the people?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually no real. There was never really any question. Do you mean in Israel or in Palestine for this, or just in general, really?
Just in general, when you went on this.
Yeah, I mean, you get a very. This is one of the beautiful. This is a shame about this being technically the Holy Land. Is actually it's a fascinating place to go if you to see these religions in action, and where they and obviously the holy sites and so actually it's not something that I came across. I think you have to just be there. I think you have to sort of take it to the places you are with. Obviously, there's a lot of different aspects within religions, for instance, of where you are and how you dress, and just to kind of bear that in mind in these sacred sites.
Now, a lot of people have tried to bring the East and the West together, so to speak. Abby, you did a bit of. I remembered at the back of my mind Daniel Barenboim, and you found something about him doing his stuff out there.
Yeah, he came together with a guy called Edward Said, and they jointly co-founded the Western Eastern Divan Orchestra. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's an initiative to bring together a group of young classical musicians from Israel, the Palestinian territories, and Arab countries to promote mutual reflection and understanding. Do you know of any other, similar sort of schemes?
I've heard of. I mean, I did hear a radio broadcast last year, and it was actually talking about surfers, and actually some quite well-known Israeli surfers managed to get surfboards into Gaza, which is actually an incredibly big thing to do.
That's extraordinary. Surfing.
And and there was actually, at this point, obviously I don't know now how if the surf club remains, and they managed to have a surf club in Gaza, and what they planned to do at the end of this was to form a circle out in the ocean, and the surfers from Gaza to meet into this invisible barrier that's been put up. Obviously, they're very restricted in the amount of ocean that they can fish in and can be in, and they were going to form a circle and then meet with Israeli surfers at this invisible barrier to make a circle, which is a very beautiful idea.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal idea. I have to see if I can Google, find a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, after this recent uprising of and the horrible things we saw, I don't know what remains of anything so much in Gaza.
Do you want to go back?
I'd love to go back. Yes.
And would you would you make more of an effort to go to Gaza, or do you think that's just a step too far for you?
It's not that it's something you just have to obviously it's going through the processes and the means to get into Gaza. But I'm sure, yes, I'd like to go to Gaza, and I think it's an important aspect of the conflict which needs to be taken into all consideration, as it's a place where there's a lot of difficulty going on.
I'm much taken by your last paragraph, or last couple of pages, where you reflect on going to Auschwitz in 2014, earlier this year. But then you finish with an open statement, I think is probably the best way to describe it. The wall between us on this day is set to remain, but I write with words and with hope that can carry into tomorrow, ... Do you believe that?
I do believe that. I think basically with that last passage was actually I finished in a Polish cafe, and it was literally the day after the peace talks were suspended by Benjamin Netanyahu because Hamas tried to form a unity government. And basically this passage there, again, it was like, oh dear, it's broken down. And basically the thing that needs to be looked at is how in Israel and Palestine there can be a space for children to grow up without the failings of the past pushed down onto them, almost conditioned into them. So this hatred, this wall between them, it's there from birth. And so I've actually, through the book launch and through some of I've actually been raising a little bit of money for 2 charities, and one of them is called Hand in Hand. And although this isn't a joint Israeli and Palestinian organisation, it's actually based in Israel, but it's schools that work with Arab citizens and Jewish citizens in Israel, and it's basically a co-educational system. So basically, Arab and Jewish children can be educated together, their backgrounds can be taught together, and this is a very important thing that can be done today to try and break down that hatred of tomorrow. So if there's more space for things like this, more space for relationships and encounters, and then to try and somehow see if there would ever be a way of this could work between Israel and Palestinians. It's a beautiful thought, but obviously the practicality of where we're living at the moment with the occupation, it's very limiting to see how at the moment there can be peace.
It's a fascinating read. I loved it. It's very accessible, and I love the different, the extracts from your diary, and then you explore it. It's now available, I take it, paperback books, $9.99. No doubt you can go online. It's called The Wall Between Us, Notes from the Holy Land, and our guest has been Matthew Small. Matthew, where's your next project? Where are you off to next, or has this exhausted you?
I'm actually doing my next project, but the first 2 months of it are based in the UK, so I'm just exploring this aspect. Probably won't say too much, but it's looking at different aspects of what poverty means today, and I'll be then contrasting that contrasting between something that is somewhere else in the world. And basically, it's quite a complicated subject, but it's basically going and seeing and trying to then put that in a way that conveys for the readers.
Fantastic. Will you let us know how that goes and be in touch with us when we can talk about it?
Of course, yeah. I mean, all going to plan. It will be publication date at the same time next year. So I'll be very happy to talk to you then.
Fantastic. Matthew Small, thank you very much for joining us on Siren FM.